What if I told you that one of the most well-known and respected players in Boston Celtics history wasn't even a Boston Celtic?
For some reason, and I don't know if it was the floor in Boston and the legacy, he would always get up for those games.
Anytime we went into the Boston Garden, we knew he was going to have a big night.
A player who some of the best defenders of all time couldn't figure out.
I'm just saying these are people that really kind of made it difficult for me. Let's start up Andrew Toney.
He's doing that little twist around move against Michael Cooper, one of the best defensive guards in the league.
He had a lightning quick first step and a weird jumper that always seemed to fall.
He put it so far out in front of him, and it was not above head level on his jump shot. It was peculiar.
Andrew Toney was a bona fide scorer, one of the finest in the NBA for a short period, playing his best in the games and moments that mattered most, and terrorizing the Boston Celtics for years.
Andrew Toney, a dynamic player, an explosive player. He loves to play against the Boston Celtics. He eats them up.
He gave the Sixers of the 80s an invaluable scoring threat to take the pressure off of Julius Erving. Without him, they don't reach the mountaintop. Yet even quicker than his rise came his fall. Injuries destroying not only his career, but also his once fruitful partnership with the Sixers organization. Andrew Toney's time in the NBA wasn't long, but in his short stay, he caused opponents a lot of sleepless nights.
I feared Andrew Toney even more than Michael Jordan.
Let's jog your memory. Growing up in Alabama, Andrew Toney was a gifted athlete, excelling in multiple sports. But it was on the hardwood where Toney began building his legend. Spending his teen years as a star at Glen High School, Andrew Toney was a big-time scorer who already felt no pressure in the biggest moments. An all-state player averaging 31 points as a junior, Toney would be even better as a senior. The entire season would be one long scoring tear, and when it was all said and done, Toney had averaged 37 points and been named the best player in Alabama. And while it initially seemed that he would remain in Alabama for college, Toney had developed a desire to leave the state, which he ultimately would, committing to Southwest Louisiana. Andrew Toney was a raging Cajun. This was a huge signing for Southwest Louisiana. The season prior had been their first season back since being put out of business for many violations in 1973. So getting a player of Toney's caliber to start rebuilding the program was huge. And Cajuns coach Jim Hatfield wasted no time in making Toney the focal point of his team. And that immediately proved to be the right choice, with Toney averaging 21 points and leading the Cajuns to 21 wins, including an 8-2 record in conference play, to finish as Southland Conference champions. Toney's sophomore season was even better. His 24.5 points would lead the Southland Conference, as he shot 56% from the field, and was named Conference Player of the Year. USL had one of the highest scoring offenses in the nation, but with the team allowing a lot of points on defense, they would rack up just 19 wins. Toney had a new coach to begin his junior season in Bobby Pascal, who was previously an assistant coach, so the game plan didn't change, and neither did Toney's production, once again leading the conference in scoring with over 23 points per game and earning a first-team all-conference selection. Not all that surprising after the work that Toney had put in leading up to this season. Individually, he was great, but the team would be the worst of Toney's time at USL, finishing with just 16 wins. Toney saved his best for last as a senior. His career-high 26.1 points per game would again lead the Southland Conference, and even be top 10 in the entire nation. And after shooting about 48% last year, he shot a career-high 56.2% from the field this year, unsurprisingly taking home his second career Conference Player of the Year award. The Ragin' Cajuns were again a dominant offense, with Toney leading the way, highlighted by a 46-point performance to defeat Auburn in the Bayou Classic Championship, one of 18 wins this season, a win total which probably would have been more if Toney hadn't missed 5 games this year. But Toney finally got a taste of the postseason, as Southwest Louisiana was given an NIT invite, and even made a bit of noise, reaching the quarterfinals before falling to Minnesota. But just like in high school, Andrew Toney was an elite scorer in college, leaving as the second leading scorer in program history, and a player who Louisiana fans felt was among the best players in the nation. Toney didn't exactly agree with all that, and only tried to prove himself every time he was on the court. But something everyone could agree on was that Andrew Toney was a surefire NBA prospect. With the 8th pick in the 1980 NBA draft, Andrew Toney was selected by the Philadelphia 76ers, just as projected, with Toney being brought in to replace the declining Doug Collins, as injuries would limit Collins to just 12 games before retiring after this season. And Toney was happy. He was joining a great and winning team, And even that was a bit of an understatement, as the Sixers were just 2 wins away from an NBA title about 6 weeks earlier. And as long as Andrew Toney could keep up his high-scoring ways to take some of the load off of superstar Julius Erving, a future Sixers championship was a pretty reasonable expectation. And speaking of Erving, Toney earned his respect pretty quickly.
Before his rookie season, I was at camp watching him play. This guy would not back off. That by maybe the second or third day of practice, Julius had adopted him. Andrew was his man already.
It seemed that Toney was going to fit right in with an already great roster, which featured third-year guard Mo Cheeks and defensive ace Bobby Jones, and even Chocolate Thunder Daryl Dawkins. But a preseason sprained ankle kept Toney on the sidelines for the first 7 games of the year, and while he would receive limited minutes upon return, head coach Billy Cunningham would still test Toney early, making him a starter in just his 6th career game due to Doug Collins breaking down. And in his first start, Toney went for 16 points. 4 games later, he dropped 32 against Indiana. Andrew Toney was showing that he was a bucket getter, even at the highest level. Toney's long-range shooting touch was invaluable to the Sixers offense. Yet while he was a starter most of the season, he wasn't always getting starter minutes, finding himself on a bit of a short leash. If his shot wasn't falling, Cunningham wouldn't hesitate to make a switch. But overall, Toney was proving himself as a real NBA player, earning more of Cunningham's trust as the season wore on. And the Sixers were a championship contender, building up a lot of big leads with their top 5 offense, leads that their number 1 defense would protect. A dangerous combination, which resulted in a 62-win regular season. Kicking off their first-round series against Indiana, Toney was again coming off the bench, as Lionel Hollins had replaced him in the starting lineup about a month earlier for defensive purposes. But if the Sixers needed offense, Toney was still their guy, putting up 15 points and 11 assists in his playoff debut. Then a few nights later, the Sixers finished the easy sweep and got a much tougher second-round matchup with Milwaukee. This series began as a nightmare for Toney, often being guarded by Sidney Moncrief. Toney's first 3 games saw him average 8 points on a combined 9 of 29 shooting. Game 4 was his best with 17 points, yet Philly lost. Then after a 3 of 11 shooting performance in a Game 6 loss, Toney saw just 2 minutes of action in Game 7, but the Sixers narrowly escaped. Next was the battle of the best, Sixers versus Celtics in the conference finals. Toney hadn't been great this postseason, but he did have some recent success versus Boston, dropping 35 points off the bench in Boston Garden in the season finale, and Cunningham hoped that it wasn't a fluke, giving Toney 31 minutes in Game 1, and Toney gave him 26 points, which included the final 2 free throws of the game, to give the Sixers the win and home court advantage, with writer Dick Weiss saying after the game that Toney was assuming a role once held by former Sixers guard World B. Free, the role of the Boston Strangler. The following night, Toney struck again, giving the Celtics deja vu with 35 points, along with 7 boards and 7 assists.
Great does, and it dropped for us. Can you stop this guy, and how?
But Boston got the win. Back in Philly, Toney dropped 19 in Game 3 and 17 in Game 4 on very efficient shooting, and the Sixers went up 3-1. But after dropping 20 points in a close Game 5 loss, Toney saw his minutes drop, but not his shots, struggling the rest of the way, with Boston blocking Toney's potential game-winning attempt in Game 6, then completing the comeback in Game 7, as Toney's rookie year had ended with him averaging about 13 points, 2 rebounds, and 3.5 assists per game. So Toney had a great rookie season, yet he still hadn't won the hearts of everyone. To some, he seemed arrogant, but to the people who knew him, he was just shy. And regardless of his personality, fans, coaches, and teammates liked what he did on the court. And while he had a shooting form that concerned some of the Sixers brass, his rookie year, and especially postseason, had put a lot of those concerns to bed. But regardless, Toney wasn't going to change anything. Toney had spent most of last season as a starter, but throughout the playoffs, he had excelled coming off the bench. So in year 2, Cunningham would use him as instant offense on the second unit. Toney's minutes were up slightly, but his production improved noticeably, becoming Philly's second leading scorer while shooting over 52% from the field. Toney was exactly what the Sixers needed to move on from Collins.
Oh, is he quick? You gotta have help with him. You better have help.
And while Toney was an all-around offensive force, the most endearing aspect of his game would continue to be his propensity to deliver in the big moments. The Celtics were the defending champs, and in their 5 meetings this season, Toney averaged over 25 points, which included 2 games with at least 30. But his career high came against the Celtics' storied rival.
Who is that guy?
He's embarrassing the Lakers. I don't know who he is, but he's embarrassing the Lakers. Kareem in the ball.
On March 7th, Toney lit up the Los Angeles Lakers for 46 points on 21 of 29 shooting in a win, something Philly was again doing quite a bit of, finishing the season at 58-24 as they drew Atlanta in round 1. Game 1 was a cakewalk for the Sixers, and while Game 2 went to overtime, 19 points from Toney helped the Sixers come out on top for another first-round sweep, and now it would be another second-round series with Milwaukee. But this time there was a big difference. Due to an injury to Lionel Hollins, the starting lineup now included Andrew Toney, an upgraded role he clearly didn't plan to relinquish, as he averaged 28.5 points on nearly 66% shooting over the first 2 games, and Philly took a 2-0 lead at home. Toney was getting some well-deserved respect and recognition, but that's not what mattered to him. He just wanted wins. He would cool off in Milwaukee, dropping 18 in Game 3 and struggling in Game 4, but still, Philly held a 3-1 lead. Then foul trouble plagued Toney the rest of the series, yet he still managed to average 18 points across the final 2 games, as Philly won in 6. Over in Boston, the Celtics were preparing for the conference finals when they got the news that there had been reported sightings of the Boston Strangler. After Game 1, there were no casualties. Toney managed just 15 points, and the Sixers lost, but they again stole home court advantage in Game 2, thanks to Toney, who tormented Celtics defenders for a game-high 30 points on 59% shooting. The Sixers took a 2-1 lead after Toney dropped 16 in Game 3, but then in Game 4, they took a stranglehold on the series. Toney had one of the greatest games of his career, pouring in a postseason career-high 39 points on 14 of 21 shooting, even adding 6 assists. No matter who they threw at him, Boston had no answer for Toney, and like last year, the Sixers were up 3-1. But then, just like last year, they were on the brink of collapsing. Games 5 and 6 had seen Toney shoot a combined 7 of 21 from the field, and Philly had dropped both. And with no momentum, how was Philly going to beat the defending champs on the road?
But I have never seen a deciding game in any series in any sport where one team was given as little chance of winning as the Philadelphia 76ers are given this afternoon. Consecutive sellout. Andrew Toney, he has to hit today for Philadelphia to have a chance.
Just when the Celtics thought they were safe, the Boston Strangler struck again.
So it looks as if Toney's not shy with the shot right now.
Making up for his last 2 games, Toney shot nearly 61% from the field.
It's the shot. And you know what? Some people say that when he's on the mark, he's unstoppable. He has 30 points in the game.
Playing with both confidence and poise, the pressure didn't affect Toney.
He's coming on, and now, timeout. The greatest sound is silence if you're a visiting club, and
he dropped a game-high 34 points, and the Sixers won in a blowout. Boston was no more, but the Sixers now had to get through the Lakers. LA knew Toney all too well. After all, he had dropped 46 on them just a couple months earlier, prompting Lakers coach Pat Riley to compare him to an all-time scoring great. And while he wouldn't hit for 46, Toney continued his hot streak, going for 20 points and 9 assists in Game 1, then a 12-point, 11-assist double-double in Game 2. The Sixers took Game 2, but had dropped Game 1, losing home court advantage as they went to LA. But then Toney really kicked it up a notch. 36 points in Game 3, 28 points and 11 assists in Game 4. Yet even with his play, Toney and the Sixers found themselves down 3-1. But 31 points on over 72% shooting from Toney in Game 5 would extend the series. Then needing to win at the Forum to keep their season alive, Toney continued ignoring the pressure, dropping 29 points and 6 assists. However, he was limited by turnovers and fouls. And with LA shooting the lights out, the Sixers again came up 2 wins short of a championship. And Toney's year ended with averages of about 16.5 points, 1.5 rebounds, and 3.5 assists per game. The Sixers had a lot of trouble with the Celtics' Robert Parrish in the conference finals, and even more trouble with Kareem in the NBA finals. And with the Sixers trading Daryl Dawkins, it went without saying that they needed a true pivot to push them over the edge. So about a month and a half before the '83 season, they went out and got one, acquiring former league MVP and perennial all-star Moses Malone from the Houston Rockets. Philly had no more excuses. Philly had the star power in Malone and Erving. They had one of the best two-way players in the league in Mo Cheeks, and they had a great defender off the bench in Bobby Jones, who would actually win Sixth Man of the Year, an award that Toney wouldn't win because he was again a starter. Last year's playoffs had shown enough, and Philly's new starting two-guard would take yet another step forward in year 3, putting up increased scoring numbers across the board and acting as the team's third leading scorer. With the addition of Malone, Toney became even more valuable. His shooting ability already opened up the paint for Erving drives, and now it gave Malone more room to operate, and also gave him someone to kick the ball to when the double team came. Philly played slower, but they made every possession count, still acting as one of the league's highest scoring teams. And even with two of the league's brightest stars, Toney was getting noticed as well, specifically for his late game heroics. Believed by some to be the league's premier closer. And when All-Star Weekend rolled around, the Sixers sent 4 of their own, and Toney was one of them. And in the games that counted, Philly was a force. The addition of league MVP Malone making an already great team even better. The Sixers won a league-high 65 games, securing them a first-round bye. Their championship quest kicked off with a semifinals matchup against New York. It was Andrew Toney's favorite time of the year. But it wasn't your typical playoff Toney to kick off the conference semis. He spent the series hampered by a thigh injury, playing in just 3 of the 4 games, and averaging 9 points. Yet while New York played admirably, the series ended in a Sixers sweep. It had become a yearly tradition for the Sixers and the Celtics to battle for a trip to the NBA Finals. But the Milwaukee Bucks had gotten rid of the Celtics first. So now Toney had to go up against the Defensive Player of the Year in Sidney Moncrief, which didn't look like much of an issue after a 22-point Game 1, which saw Toney shoot over 73%. After 3 games, the Sixers were on the verge of another sweep. Toney went for 24 in Game 4, but the Bucks gave the Sixers their first blemish and kept their season alive. Yet the celebration was short-lived. 3 nights later, Toney put them to bed, dropping a game-high 30 points. The Sixers were heading back to the finals, with a chance for redemption against the Lakers. Toney didn't have his most efficient shooting series, going against another premier defender in Michael Cooper, but he would still act as Philly's second leading scorer, averaging 22 points a night, and also dishing nearly 6 assists. 3 games passed, and the Sixers had won them all, each more convincingly than the last. Then with the help of 23 points and 9 assists from Toney in Game 4, Philly completed the final sweep, winning their 3rd championship in franchise history.
Hey, Mr. Toney, how did you feel when the buzzer went off and we had won the world? The way I felt, I tell you, I didn't even know I had these.
Toney's championship season ending with him averaging about 19.5 points, 3 rebounds, and 4.5 assists per game. Some of Philly's top players were aging, but there was no doubt that they were still a championship caliber team. And with Andrew Toney set to start his 4th NBA season, nearing what should be his prime, it seemed they'd be competitive for a while. Toney continued his steady improvement, putting up career-high scoring numbers, as he was one of 3 Sixers to average at least 20 points. And for a guy who shot so many jumpers, his career-high 52.7% shooting was extremely impressive. Toney was again an all-star, one of the best offensive players in the league. Every possession was something different, with his unorthodox and unpredictable style. And although the Celtics and Sixers hadn't met in last year's playoffs, the Boston Strangler still haunted the dreams of Red Auerbach, prompting him to acquire all-world defender Dennis Johnson, one of the main reasons being specifically to stop Toney. But that was just another challenge for Toney to take head-on.
Toney takes Dennis Johnson one-on-one. He makes a little call to Red Auerbach. He said, "Hey, Red, who are you going to get now to check me? Because he isn't going to handle me one-on-one."
While Philly had some of the league's best scorers in their starting 5, they had minimal scoring off the bench. Their defense was still top tier. But overall, it wouldn't be the same dominant season as last year. However, 52 wins was still more than enough for a playoff berth. The title defense began with a first-round matchup against New Jersey, one that Philly was expected to win. But then Game 3 began in New Jersey, and Philly's backs were against the wall, down 0-2, having dropped both at home. Toney had been good, but the Sixers' defense just couldn't stop the Nets. Yet they did eventually get back on track, winning Games 3 and 4 to set up a winner-take-all Game 5. Toney turned in an efficient 22 points, but when the final buzzer sounded, the Nets had won, shocking the defending champions, as Toney's year ended with averages of about 20.5 points, 2.5 rebounds, and 5 assists per game. Bobby Jones was slowing down, but just as they had done with Doug Collins a few years earlier, they found his replacement through the draft, selecting Auburn's Charles Barkley 5th overall, reloaded, just like that. Barkley's fresh legs and rebounding were a welcome addition. He took on some of the scoring as well, but it was still Erving and Malone leading the way, with Toney quietly acting as option number 3. For the first time in his career, Toney didn't improve his scoring, but he was still putting up nearly 18 points a night and averaging a career-high 5.2 assists in a new offense, which incorporated a lot more screens and emphasized ball movement. But with the Sixers averaging over 5 points more than they had last year, it was a good change. Philly seemed to be rebounding from last season, even stringing together a 13-game win streak shortly before the All-Star break. The Sixers looked great, but as the year wore on, something seemed off with Toney. In late December, Toney signed a 7-year extension with Philly, a reward for his years of great play. Yet during this season, although he had been playing well at times, the consistency was lacking. Toney had missed some games early in the year due to an ankle injury, but that was supposed to be in the past. Yet his shooting efficiency and volume saw major drops in the final month of the year, even briefly being removed from the starting lineup in March. There wasn't really an explanation, and Toney still played 70 games, so you just hoped things would improve in the playoffs, as the Sixers won 58 games and got a date with Washington in round 1. Going into the series, Toney was again hobbled by a sore ankle, but he pushed through it and appeared in every game, even dropping 31 points in a Game 2 win, and dropping 17 points on 7 of 9 shooting to close out the Bullets in Game 4. Next up was a more familiar foe, in the Milwaukee Bucks. Toney would start slow, but with each game he would get better, going from a 7-point Game 1 to a 23-point and 11-assist Game 4. He was looking healthier and was picking up steam. The Sixers were also rolling, as they would end up sweeping Milwaukee, making a return to the conference finals, ready to renew a rivalry, as their opponent was the Boston Celtics. Now it was really time to see how Toney would fare against Dennis Johnson. He was solid in Game 1 with 16 points, but then was held to 7 points in Game 2. Yet in Game 3, he shot 9 of 14 from the field and poured in 26. Yet it didn't matter how Toney was playing, because Boston had won every game. Now the Sixers were in danger of being swept. But with a repeat 26-point performance from Toney in Game 4, they lived to see another day. But 3 nights later, Toney was held to 13 points. And while the ball was in his hands in the waning seconds, with a chance to tie the game, Toney hesitated, and Larry Bird poked the ball loose. The Celtics held on and won the series, as Toney's year had seen him average about 18 points, 2.5 rebounds, and 5 assists per game. The season had been inconsistent for Toney. He had a new deal, but there had also been reports during last year that him and Cunningham didn't have the best relationship. From Toney's perspective, he was more of a scapegoat, but he was still supposed to be their guy, until everything began to unravel. During the offseason, Cunningham stepped down, replaced by Matt Guokas. So if there were real issues between Toney and Cunningham, they shouldn't be a problem anymore. Yet injuries continued to be a problem. Toney spent a lot of the offseason in a cast, due to what was diagnosed as a sprained right ankle. The issues he had experienced last year were on his left ankle. Then the season began, and while Toney seemed good to go, he couldn't stay on the court for more than a few minutes. He was experiencing significant foot pain, and after just 3 games, he was sidelined for 3 months. He attempted multiple returns later in the season, but overall would only appear in 6 games this year, averaging about 4 points, 1 rebound, and 2 assists per game. But Toney had been relatively healthy his whole career, and it seemed weird that sprained ankles would affect anyone this much. What was really going on with Andrew Toney? So after Toney was initially sidelined, It didn't seem like his injuries were being taken too seriously, with Gukas refusing to put him on injured reserve and basically saying that whatever it was, he needed to suck it up because the team needed him. Then more x-rays came back. It wasn't just a sprained ankle, it was a stress fracture, first in his right foot and later both feet, specifically a fracture of the navicular bone, an injury similar to the one that had prematurely ended the career of the man Toney replaced, Doug Collins. And while no one wants to be injured, Toney felt relieved, finally vindicated, as he knew something had been wrong for a while, but without proof, no one had believed him. And then just a few days later, it got worse. In mid-November of the 85-86 season, Toney would undergo surgery, not on his fractured right foot, but instead on his left foot, to remove bone spurs. Toney couldn't help but be a little upset. He had been complaining of this pain since early in the season prior, yet the front office did little to figure out the true source, likely making it worse, as the team expected him to play through the pain throughout that season, wanting Toney to ignore his injuries, and in turn, painting him as the bad guy. And it trickled into his everyday life, with fans also doubting if he was really hurt. Then to make things even worse, owner Harold Katz had given Toney an ultimatum last season: play through the pain or be suspended. Toney appeared in just one more game after that, groin surgery of all things, officially ending his season. Yet even through all of that, when the 87 season began, there was Andrew Toney on opening night, suited up in a Sixers uniform. While Toney would make his return this year, he wouldn't get much fanfare, as 87 was the Dr. J farewell tour, with fans still hoping that Toney could regain form and make the loss of Erving a little easier. Toney was available over the first couple months, but didn't get much play, then would miss most of January, placed on the injured list after Sixers doctors recommended exploratory surgery on his feet. But when Toney declined, Philly banned him from practicing with the team or sitting on the bench during games, now labeled as a negative influence. But Toney kept working his way back, trying to get on the court and produce. Yet he was still met with doubt and scrutiny.
Well, it's been a big controversy here in Philadelphia because he had the two sore feet. He couldn't play, and a lot of people thought that maybe he wasn't working hard. He lost 10 pounds in 10 days to get into shape, and everyone said a healthy Andrew Toney, what's the problem with him? And finally, I guess he feels, and only he would really know, that he is comfortable enough and feels good enough to play like he is playing now.
Some players have difficulty playing with pain. He is one of those players.
And that last statement was just unfair. It's safe to say that any player would have more difficulty playing with pain than without it. And going back to his earliest years, Toney had often played through pain and injury, and played well. So while it wasn't the same Andrew Toney in 87, when he was feeling good, he still had it. He even put together a 14-game stretch late in the season where he averaged over 18 points, and overall played a respectable 52 games, mostly coming off the bench, for a Sixers team who won 45 games. And got a first-round matchup with Milwaukee. Toney appeared in every game, but he was hurting, playing less minutes as the series went on. The two teams went the distance, but in the end, Milwaukee came out on top. And Toney's return season had seen him average about 10.5 points, 1.5 rebounds, and 3.5 assists per game. Andrew Toney's future with the Sixers was in question, and so was his career. Doug Collins knew all too well how debilitating foot injuries could be. After another surgery during the summer, followed by further injury, Toney made his debut a few games into the 88 season, playing sparingly, then was again suspended in early January for failure to comply. Toney's team threatened lawsuit, and by late January, he was made a starter. Though his minutes were still quite low, it was one last test to see if his feet could hold up. But 1 month after cracking the starting lineup, he played his last game, appearing in 29 total games, and averaging about 7.5 points, 1.5 rebounds, and 3.5 assists per game. Toney had played his final game. Following the season, he was pushed into retirement, Sixers owner Harold Katz telling him he'd be paid if he walked away, marking an unfortunate end to Toney's career. But he also knew his feet couldn't handle the pro game anymore. And regardless, a pre-injury Andrew Toney was a player who struck fear into the hearts of most defenders, and remained etched in the minds of many Celtics, even referred to as the most forgotten great player in NBA history by Boston Globe writer Bob Ryan. And in his post-playing years, Toney has kept an expected low profile, More recently working as a school teacher, Andrew Toney was quiet and calculated, and once he saw that first shot drop, you were in trouble. One of the most confident players of all time, even playing alongside some of the greatest players ever, Toney never hesitated to play his game, and his game was scoring. The bigger the moment, the better he played. The Sixers don't win that '83 title without Andrew Toney, and if not for the injuries, he may have played his way into a lot of all-time shooting guard lists. The injuries were tough, but the controversy that came from it was much worse, putting an unfortunate blemish on an otherwise impressive career. Andrew Toney came and went in the blink of an eye, but he left a mark on his opponents that will never be forgotten. But that's it for today's episode on Andrew Toney. Hope you enjoyed it, and make sure to subscribe for more videos like this one. If you liked it, check out this one on another teammate whose career was cut short by injury. Or this one on the player who was brought in just to stop him. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.